All right, so today we're going to talk about radical Radical Reconstruction took place after the presidential Reconstruction. So we had Lincoln start it, Andrew Johnson take over. He got ousted. They started to impeach him because of what he was doing. They didn't like, and then the Congress took over. So in early 1867, Congress removed all Southern governments that refused to ratify the 14th Amendment. Martial law was imposed, which means they put the military in charge of everything. And they created 4 districts. So these are the districts at the bottom of the page. The military run. They had generals in charge. Congress was in charge of everything. Before a state could return to the Union, they had to write a new constitution, ratify the 14th Amendment, and let African Americans vote. Most of the states did this right away. This was an important step. They started to accept it, supposedly, which led to a lot of African Americans in charge in politics. This is a picture of African Americans voting. Third one back you see was a soldier. They're going up and voting. This is right after. This is an 1868 election. Congress has given them the power to vote. In the election of 1868, because African Americans have power now, Republicans win all Southern states. African Americans' role in the politics, they were elected sheriffs, mayors, judges, and even legislatures. 16 of the House, members of the House were African Americans, and 2 in the Senate were elected to Congress. So right after, in 1868, there was a lot of African Americans starting to become important roles in politics. Everything was going great. Everybody felt like, hey, it's working. We're doing what we need to do. Women had property rights with the Radical Reconstruction. Public schools were being developed. Voting was fair. Everybody was allowed to vote if they could. And taxes were spread out evenly between whites and blacks. So it was really, really working. However, during this time, we started having 3 groups who became Southern Republicans. The South hated these 3 groups. We had scallywags, who were Southern whites who opposed secession. We have the freedmen, which were the former slaves. And we have carpetbaggers, which were Northerners who went south for business or political gains. Scallywags, freedmen, and carpetbaggers were hated in the South. The KKK, when we talk about them, actually attacked all 3 groups. So all 3 groups were attacked by the Southern Democrats, and they were actually in charge during this time. In the election of 1868 also, U.S. Grant defeated Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson was just impeached. He actually survived impeachment by 1 vote. Lost all power. Congress took over, did everything. He had no options of anything. So U.S. Grant took over in 1868. And he was a little more hard on the South. He fought against them, so he was hard on them. In 1869, the 15th Amendment was proposed. Democrats opposed this one greatly, but it got pushed through because of the Republicans. The 15th Amendment barred all states from denying black males the right to vote on account of race, color, or previous servitude. Basically, it was trying to protect the right to vote for everyone, especially the African Americans. African Americans condemned this amendment. They said it was too weak and it didn't protect them against Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws were laws put in place by states to try to prevent them to vote, even though it says they can't. So the way they got around it was they required voters to own their own property and pay a voting tax. And a lot of the freedmen were too poor. They didn't own their own land and didn't have enough money to pay a tax, so they couldn't vote. So this is the South's answer to all the elections of 1868 where African Americans were starting to get in power. They were taking away the power. Jim Crow laws went clear through Martin Luther King in the 60s for like 100 years, taking away rights. And after this, the Southern Democrats were very opposed to all of this. They were losing their power. They became angry because they were being shut out of power. So they started forming secret societies. The KKK was the most well-known. People wore pointed hoods and robes to hide their faces. They rode at night to African American homes to burn wooden crosses and threaten them. And if the threats failed, they would pull them out of their houses and whip them, torture them, shoot them, hang them. They would hang African Americans. They would hang scallywags, carpetbaggers, white Republicans, anybody who opposed them. Very, very, very violent group. Because of this, the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan Acts of 1870 and 1871 barred them from using the force against voters. They were arrested on site. They were imprisoned. Military versus the clans were very commonplace. The original Klan ends up dissolving and new groups take its place, new versions of the KKK. You guys even had a version about 8, 10, 12 years ago that marched through Mount Victory, and there was violence in Mount Victory. So this was something that took place even up here. It was very, very prominent in Mississippi. Mississippi is still one of the most racial tense states in the country. That is radical Reconstruction in a nutshell. There's not a lot to it. They were trying to protect the rights. It incited a lot of violence. By the end of the day, Tuesday, you need to read section 3. This is the last section we're going to cover in our books, pages 558 to 563. Take notes, pay attention, check your progress questions 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Questions 4 and 5 are vocab words. Look at the actual vocab words on page 558 at the top and use those to fill in the blanks. We are going to have a test over causes of Civil War battles, and Reconstruction on Friday. It's going to be a 30, 40-point test. You need to study those 3 sections. Study the road to the Civil War. Study the battles that we did. Study all the PowerPoints. We're going to do a quick review on Wednesday. I'll send out meets for that. There are no Google Meets on Thursday and Friday. There's just if you want to study, you can meet up with me on Wednesday to study. I'll split it into 2 groups and we'll study, but that's really all there is to it. Friday will be the last thing you do in this class. And then obviously you can turn in any late work until May 20th, which is a week from Wednesday. As of May 20th, at the end of the day, I cut it off and there's no more late work turned in. So please get everything done and get your grades up. It's important for you guys to get your grades up so you can play sports in the fall, and these grades do matter. Have a great day, guys. See ya.